take this. I haven't been hitting that. It's okay, that's fine. It's just a bit. Can you put it away? You must start sponsors. Okay, good morning, everybody. Talmud Torah, sponsored by Adam and Yudit Benzev in honor of their children, Jake Sarina and Rosie. Week of learning is from the Friends of the Pacinos. We'd like to wish Mel and Judy and Mazel Tov in their upcoming Aliyah. We are sad to see them go, but we cannot be happier for you to embark on the next stage. Just thinking it's going to be easier for Mel to stay with the group because now it's in the middle of the afternoon. Okay. Daf Yomi by Bill and Rosie Eskin in memory of Rosie's father, Reb Nachum ben Moshe, whose yahrzeit is on Yud Tes Tammuz, and Matt and Suki Schoenfeld for Refuah Shalema for Herschel Yisrael ben Pescha Yenta Rezel. Okay, we are on Pei Aleph Amud Beis. We're going to do daf and a half Yomi. Okay, about 2 dots halfway down. First word on the line is Ki'ilu. 2 dots. Achal ochlin she'ein ru'yin la'achila. So we learned in the Mishnah that if a person eats foods which are not fit to be eaten, so then he's pater, he's not obligated in kares. Amar Rava, kas palpuli biyom de kipuri pater. Person who's kas Rashi says earlier is a way, anything which a person eats in an unusual way. Pilpuli, if a person eats pilpuli, how did they translate pilpuli over there? Peppers? Pepper, okay. So if a person eats that biyom de kipuri, he's pater. Kas zangvila, I believe that's ginger. Biyom de kipuri, then he's pater. Person who eats ginger Yom Kippur, he's pater. That's not called eating. Meis vehayi Reb Meir Omer mi mashma shenemar va'araltem arloso aspiryo. So there's a mitzvah in the Torah called arlo, which means when a person has a fruit tree, the first 3 years, he's not allowed to benefit from the fruits. So the pasuk says araltem arloso aspiryo, which means he shouldn't eat those fruits. So if the pasuk starts telling me to not use the fruits, then I understand it's coming from a tree that grows fruits. So why does the pasuk have to say after that it's an eitz meichel? It's a type of tree which produces fruits. If you tell me don't eat the fruits, I know it's the type of tree that produces fruits. So lamatam lomar eitz meichel. So why did the Torah later go in that same pasuk say that it's a fruit tree? To tell me eitz shetam eitzo piryo shave, that it's referring to a tree where its eitz, the tree itself, and the fruits have a similar taste. Have yomers a pilpulin, which is a reference to a type of tree that grows pilpulin. Lamedcha to teach you pilpulin chayavin ba'arla, that even this type of fruit, pilpulin, is obligated in arla, the mitzvah of arla. Ve'in Eretz Yisrael chaser klum. And Eretz Yisrael has all types of things. Shenemar l'sechsar kol ba, that there's not going to be anything lacking in Eretz Yisrael. So what the Gemara is asking is, you told me that if you eat pilpuli on Yom Kippur, you're not obligated because it's not defined as food. But we seem to see in this brisa that he's understanding that it's included in the normal mitzvah of arla, which applies to fruit, which applies to a fruit tree, which is defined by food. So it seems like pilpuli is called food. So lokasha haber tifta haber yevishta. The Gemara says it depends. If it's still moist, so then it could be called food. Once it's dried out, so then it's not defined as food. Amrle Ravina l'merema v'amar Rav Nachman hayim losa the asimi behindoi sharya u'mevarchin alei brepe adama. But he said him losa. Rashi says lituriga. How did they translate that one? Lectuary, is that English? Okay. So himlasa, the asimi behundoi, which comes from this place hindoi, they said that it's sharia, a person's allowed to eat it. That means that if it was cooked by a non-Jewish person, right? So there's a prohibition called bishul akum, that if a non-Jewish person cooks something for a Jew, depending on the case, he's not allowed to use it. Okay. But we had a halacha saying that it's okay for a person to eat it, and you can make berei pri adama. The reason it's okay for a person to eat it, Rashi says, is that since it could be eaten raw, so something which could be eaten even unprepared, so then if it's cooked by the bishul akum, that doesn't prohibit it. So we see that it's edible raw. So we're challenging that another food, which seemingly we would have called unedible, and they would have said you're exempt on Yom Kippur, we seem to say that we define those types of things as food. So lo kasher b'tif ta'bi v'shemar says the same answer. If it's moist, so then it still could be defined as food. But once these items are dried out, so then it already doesn't pass the test to be defined as food. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan, achal ale kanim pater. Person who ate branches from a tree, he's pater. Lulavi gefanim chayiv. But if it's branches from a grapevine, which we'll see it's at the beginning of its development, where it's before it gets hard, so therefore it's still called edible, and therefore if he eats that on Yom Kippur, he's chayiv. Eluhein lulavi gefanim. What's the definition of these types of branches, which if a person eats it, he's obligated? Amar Rav Yitzchak migad lo kol sheliv levo mirashan ve'yom kippurim. If it was produced within the last 10 days, in other words, we're talking on Yom Kippur. So if it was produced in the last 10 days, so it's still in a very early stage before it hardens, so then it's defined as food. But if it was earlier than that, he's saying it's already going to be too hard to not be defined as food on Yom Kippur. Rav Kahana, Amar Kol Shloshim Yom, Rav Kahana disagreed. He said 30 days, as long as it's within 30 days of Yom Kippur, that's still soft enough to be defined as food. Tanya Kavasi de Rav Yitzchak Megadlah, we have a raya, a support to the first opinion that said 10 days, because the Brisa says, Achal ale kanim pater, lulavi gefanim chayiv. It says the same distinction, that the only time he's obligated is if it's these branches from a grapevine. Elohein lulavi gefanim, and which types of branches is he obligated? Kol sheliv from Rosh Hashanah v'ad Yom Kippurim, that if it was produced in the last 10 days, which is explicit like the first opinion who said it needs to be 10 days, but before 10 days would already be too hard to be considered food on Yom Kippur. Okay, about 5 lines up from the bottom. Shasa tzir omor pater. The Mishnah said that if a person drank tzir or moryas, so tzir is a liquid that comes out of a fish through salting it, and moryas is like just a natural fish juice that comes out from cooking it. So if a person drank either of those, which are not the most, not the best drink in the world, so he's pater because that's not defined as eating. Hachometz chayiv. The Gemara says, if you said those two, then it sounds like vinegar, which is closer to a normal drink. He's obligated. Masnis and money. Who's the opinion of the Mishnah? Rebbe he Tani Rebbe Omer chometz meishav es hanefesh, because Rebbe said that vinegar, right? Our standard is yisuv daita, some level of comfort from this shear, this amount of food which he ate. So Rebbe's opinion was that vinegar passes the test, and therefore we're saying the Mishnah, which sounds like vinegar would have a different status, must be the opinion of Rebbe. Darish Rav Gidol bar Menashe mebiri dinarash. So Rav Gidol darshaned ein halacha ke Rebbe. He got up and said, we don't hold like Rebbe. We hold that if a person drank vinegar on Yom Kippur, he's exempt. That's not called he drank. L'shana nafik kuli alma mazgu v'shasu chala. Next year, bad things happened. Everybody in Yom Kippur was making their vinegar drinks. Okay, so they took some vinegar, they mixed some water in to dilute it, and everybody was drinking on Yom Kippur. Shamer of Gidol, he heard v'ikvid, he got very upset. Amar Eimer damri ana di'evid. V'chatchila mi'amri, I was saying if a person did it, he's exempt. I wasn't saying you can go ahead and have some vinegar drinks on Yom Kippur. Eimer damri ana porta tuva mi'amri, I was only saying you can have a little bit, but if you had a lot, so then it would sound like everyone agrees that you're chayiv. It sounds like he's saying, Rebbe's opinion was if you have, let's say the shear, in other words, a ki, sorry, I'm just blinking. Right, the shir we said in the Mishnah was, thank you, Kimal Lugmav. So Rebbe was saying if you have that amount of vinegar, you're obligated. So he was saying we don't hold like that, but he's saying, but if you had a lot of vinegar, so then everyone would agree you're obligated. So you for sure can't go have lots of vinegar in Yom Kippur. And Emer Damriano Chai Mozig Miami, I was only saying straight vinegar. Once you start diluting water, so then it's also a problem because then you're drinking water also on Yom Kippur. Okay. Mishnah Tapa Pei Beis. Hatinokas ein ma'anan osan b'Yom Kippurim. If a person has a child under bar bas mitzvah, he should not make them fast on Yom Kippur. Aval mechanchen osan lifnei shana lifnei shanatayim. But he should be mechanich them, train them lifnei shana. The Gemara originally is going to read this as before a year, which means 2 years before their bar bas mitzvah. Lifnei shanatayim, and before 2 years, which means 3 years. Okay, so it means 2 years before and 3 years before, then he should be doing something. Okay, we'll see in the Gemara what exactly that is. B'shvil shirigilim b'mitzvahs, in order that they should be rugil b'mitzvahs, that they should get used to doing it. Says the Gemara, Hashta b'fnei shtayim mechanchin lehu b'fnei shana mibai. If you tell me 3 years before you should be training him, so then why do you have to tell me and 2 years before? Right? If I should start something earlier, so then why are you telling me and do it the next year also? So it depends on what type of kid it is. If the kid's 100% healthy, so then we'll see what the Mishnah is saying, but it's saying start 3 years early. If the kid is less healthy, so then, we're not talking it's sick to the point where it's dangerous, but we're saying it's it's weaker than the normal kid. So then the Mishnah is saying you should push it off 1 year. So in other words, 3 years before is for the healthy kid. 2 years before for the not as healthy kid. Okay, so now what are we saying to do? Amar Rav Huna, Ben Ches. So he's talking about girls. When a girl is 8, uben tes or 9, mechanchen oso l'shos, then you should train it for hours, which means if she's 8 and she's healthy, so then you do l'shos for hours, which later in the Gemara is going to sound like that if a kid normally eats breakfast at 7 o'clock, so then you push it off an hour. The breakfast an hour later. That's what it means. Chinuch l'shos. So if a girl's 8 and she's healthy, or if she's not as healthy, then 9. Or if Chizda says mechanchen oso l'shos, so then you do like an hour delay of the meal. Ben Yud or Ben Yud Aleph. But once a girl is 10, if she's healthy, or 11, if she's not as healthy, then mashlimen midarabanan. Then she should finish her fast. Ben Yud Beis mashlimen midaraisa betino. Because once a girl's 12, so then midaraisa she has to fast on Yom Kippur. Okay, so when she's 12, she has to fast from the Torah, and he basically gave four measurements: 8 and 9 for the healthy and unhealthy for pushing off the hour, and 10 and 11 for finishing the fast. 10 for the healthy girl, 11 for the less healthy girl. Rav Nachman Amar Ben Tessa Ben Yud. So Rav Nachman's talking about a boy. They're not disagreeing. They're just talking about two different cases. Rav Nachman says if it's a boy when he's 9, so then he should do hours. Ben Yud, and when he's 10, if he's not as healthy, he should push off that hour. Ben Yud Aleph, Ben Yud Beis, Mashlim Rabbanan. And if he's 11 and healthy, so then he should finish. If he's 12 and not as healthy, so then only once he's 12 he should finish. And Ben Yud Gimel, once the boy is 13, Mashlimin Midai Raisa Betinuk, then he should finish from the Torah. He has to finish fasting. So in other words, they're both saying the same structure. One was talking about a girl, one was talking about a boy. They're both making a distinction of 1 year between a healthy kid and a not as healthy kid. And they're saying that there's two different stages. There's the one stage of being mechanach l'sha'os, which means training them just to push off an hour. And then the next stage, which for each kid happens 2 years later, means for that kid they should finish the fast. Rabbi Yochanan Omer hashlama d'Rabbanan leka. Rabbi Yochanan says, I don't think that we ever obligate a child under bar bas mitzvah to finish fasting. So what do I hold? Ben Yud Aleph. So he's talking about a girl, that if a girl would be 10 and healthy, then she should do the shos, the hour. Ben Yud Aleph, if she's not as healthy, Same thing, mechanchen so l'shos. Ben Yud Beis mashlimin midarayz. And once she's 12, then she has to do it min haTorah. So in other words, their disagreement is Rabbi Yochanan saying, I don't think a boy or girl under bar bas mitzvah ever has to fast fully. So what do I hold? That 2 years before bar bas mitzvah, they have to, if they're healthy, they do the hour. And if they're not as healthy, then 1 year before bar bas mitzvah, they do the hour. The first opinions were saying 4 years before bar bas mitzvah, if they're healthy, they do an hour. 3 years if they're not as healthy. And 2 years and 1 year before, that's when the boys and girls under bar bas mitzvah need to finish. Okay, so we have a disagreement. Is there ever an obligation because of chinuch, because of training the child, that they have to finish the fast before bar bas mitzvah? Okay, Tnana Tinokos ein ma'ananos am Yom Kippurim. The Mishnah said that by children you don't force them to fast. But you should be machanech them, train them, which we said the Gemara is going to read it as lifnei shana, which means before a year, which means 2 years before. Ulifnei shtayim, which means before 2 years, which means 3 years before. Okay, so it's a little confusing the way it was written, but let's assume it said 2 years before their bar bas mitzvah and 3 years before their bar bas mitzvah. So Bishma l'Rifun of Rav Nachman. According to the first opinions, I'll read it as lifnei shtana lifnei shnayim, lifnei shnana l'divrayim, lifnei shnayim l'divrayim, which Rashi explains, the way they'll read the Mishnah is 3 years before bar bas mitzvah, a child needs to do sha'os, which is hours, which is 2 years before that child needs to finish. So in other words, they're talking about a not as healthy child, and the Mishnah would be saying 3 years before the girl is bas mitzvah, which means when she's 9. So then she needs to start doing sha'os, hours, if she's the chola, the not as healthy girl, which is 2 years before she needs to finish, which is when she's 11. Okay, because their opinion was 3 years before you do hours, and 1 year before you finish. So that's how they would read the Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan kasha, but the Gemara is challenging. Rabbi Yochanan said the only thing there is 2 years before an hour if you're a healthy child, and 1 year before if you're a less healthy child. So why is the Mishnah talking about 3 years before, according to Rabbi Yochanan? There's no halacha that has anything to do with 3 years before. So Amar Lecha Rabbi Yochanan, my shana oshtayim samach lepirkan. Rabbi Yochanan saying, here Rashi explains it, is that he's saying don't read the Mishnah means before a year, which means 2 years, before 2 years, which means 3 years. So read it as 1 year or 2 years before. Okay, so meaning what was confusing the Gemara is the lifnei shana, that lamed, which means before a year. Rabbi Yochanan is saying you don't have to read it that way. I'm comfortable reading it as a year before and 2 years before. And I'll say that's exactly what I'm saying. 2 years before you finish hours for the healthy child, and 1 year before was for the unhealthy child. Tashma, Mar says we have a question from a brisa. Did Tani Rabba bar Shmuel Tinokas ein ma'ananos son b'Yom Kippurim? The brisa says by children you don't force them to fast. But 1 or 2 years before you train them samach lepirkan, close to when they become bar bas mitzvah. Bishmal Rabbi Yochanan nicha. Says the Gemara, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that makes sense because it said explicitly that you train them an hour or two. What is it? Oh, 1 or 2 years. Thank you. Shana Shnayim, 1 or 2 years before their bar bas mitzvah. El Rav Huna, Rav Nachman kasha. But says the Gemara, according to Rav Huna, Rav Nachman, it's a question because the Gemara is assuming that if you say mechanchin, so that normally is a reference to training for hours, not for finishing. And it said 1 or 2 years before bar bas mitzvah, you train, and we're assuming the training is for hours. So in Rabbi Yochanan, that's exactly what he said. He said 1 or 2 years before bar bas mitzvah, then the child needs to do an hour, whether he's a healthy or unhealthy, if it's 1 year before. But according to the first opinion, who said that the only time you do hours is 3 and 4 years before, but 1 and 2 years before they held a child needs to finish. So this brisa doesn't sound like that. So now they'll read this brisa, even though it said the word chinuch, they'll read it means you train them to finish. Umikar lechinach hashlama challenges the Gemara, would the Brisa refer to finishing as the word chinuch? Vatanya eze chinuch hayarogel lechol b'shtei shos machilon asel l'shalosh b'shalosh machilon asel b'arba. There's a Brisa saying what's chinuch by Yom Kippurim, that if a child eats by 2 hours during the day, you push it off 1 hour to 3 hours. If a child eats by 3 hours, you push it off to 4 hours. So the Gemara is challenging. It sounds like the Brisa is using the word chinuch in the context of pushing off an hour. Are you going to tell me that the other Brisa, which said you should start 1 or 2 years before Bar Bas Mitzvah and said the word chinuch, is referring to even making them finish? So Amar Rava Bar Ula, yeah, Trei Chinuchi Havu. Yeah, I'm going to say that even though one Brisa referred to the word chinuch as pushing off hours, I'm comfortable saying the other Brisa said the word chinuch and it was really referencing finishing the fast. Okay, let's just take a look at this halacha inside. Okay, the Mechaber says, Katan ben teisha shanim shleimus, uben eser shanim shleimus, a healthy child who's 9, or a 10-year-old child, mechanchen asal l'shos. Then a person should train him for hours. Ketza, hayiraga lechol b'shtei shos bayom, machilon asal b'shos. If a child normally eats breakfast 2 hours into the day, then you should push off the meal 1 hour. Hayaraga lechol b'shalosh, machilon asal b'arba. And if a person normally eats 3 hours, you should push it off to 4. Lefikoach haben mosifen la'anos asal b'shos. And according to the strength of the child, you can add on to the hours. In other words, a person should assess how much the child can handle. That's the same for a girl, a healthy girl. When a child is 11, then a person should finish in order to train them. Says that was the Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber. The Ramah says, Yesh omrim she'einan tzrichem lahashlam midrabanan klal. But some hold, like the other opinion we had in our Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan, that when a child is under Bar Bas Mitzvah, they don't need to finish. In other words, the Shulchan Aruch seems to be holding like the first opinion. And the Ramah is saying that some hold that when they're under Bar Bas Mitzvah, they never need to finish. Yesh lismach alayhu, you can rely on that benarshu kachash v'nechazak lasanos. At least on a child that's weaker, you can for sure rely on the second opinion that says a child does not need to finish a fast under Bar Bas Mitzvah. The Ramah adds a place where you train the child when it comes to eating. You also should change him. You also should train him in the other mitzvahs of the day, of not anointing oneself and not washing oneself. Okay, so that's the basic. Okay. Right, we certainly see that when it comes to fasting, Chazal were more concerned than typical chinuch in terms of pushing off the age. So sometimes when you're a kid, it's exciting to want to be like the adults. We certainly see like they were concerned with not allowing the kids to do it before they're ready for the age. Okay, the Mishnah says, Ober shericha machilon osa at shetashev nafsha. If a lady's pregnant and the child smells something, that means the lady starts getting a craving. So then the Mishnah says, machilon osa shetashev nafsha. You can feed her until she calms down. So Rashi explains that if the child starts making her having a craving, so then it's a sakana, can be dangerous if she doesn't start eating the food. We'll see in the Gemara other advice that they used to give her to try to avoid the situation. Chole, person sick, machilon asal pi bekiyim. A person can feed him based on bekiyim, which means the experts, the doctors, saying that this person needs to eat. It's dangerous if he doesn't eat. Tomorrow, we will have a whole Gemara about how many doctors, and if people are disagreeing with each other, who do you believe to feed a sick person? If there's no experts there, so then if the person himself says he needs food, you can believe him. In other words, we can't see anything noticeable that the person's sick, but the person says, I need food. I'm not feeling well, and I know that I'm in a situation where it's dangerous. So then you're allowed to feed him until he says it's enough. Tan Rabbanan Ubra Shericha Basar Kodesh Basar Chazir. If you have a child in the womb who smelled something and made the lady have this desire for Basar Kodesh, for meat which belongs to the Beis HaMikdash, which a person is not allowed to eat, a Basar Chazir or some treif. Tochvin Lakush Berotev, so you can stick a toothpick, Berotev, in the sauce, and Manichan Lal Pia, and you put it right by her mouth. If that's enough to calm her down without eating it itself, so good. And if it's not enough to have it right by her mouth, then you can feed her the sauce. If that's enough, that's okay. Then you can give her the meat itself. Why? There's nothing that stands in the way of saving a person's life, chutz, except for three things. Serving idols, which means if a person would come up and say, go serve these idols or I'll kill you. So the halacha is that a person has to give up his life. V'giloy arayos, and having illicit relations. If a person would say, go have relations with this married lady or I'll kill you, so that's another situation a person is not allowed to go do it. V'shvichus damim, and the third is, if a person would come up and say, go kill that person or I'll kill you, the person's obligated to not go kill the person and be willing to give up his life. So what's the source of these three? Avodah Zarah minolan, how do you know that if a person is forced to serve idols or get killed, that he's forced to not serve the idols? The Tanya. The pasuk in Kriya Shema. If the pasuk says you shall love Hashem b'chol nafshecha, which means with your whole life, lama nemer b'chol me'odecha, then why does it have to say with all your money? And if it says love Hashem with all your money, lama nemer b'chol nafshecha, why did the pasuk also have to say with all your life? To tell you, if you have a person who appreciates its body more than his money, therefore to that person the Torah says you shall love Hashem with your whole body. And if you have a person whose money to him is more valuable than his life, so to him the Torah says you shall love Hashem with all your money. In other words, the Torah is talking to anybody. Even if you love your money more than your life, which means you'd be willing to give up your life, but you're not willing to give up your money, still the pasuk saying of v'chol me'odecha. You have to love Hashem with your life and your money. So the Gemara is understanding that the context of this pasuk is really coming to teach me this halacha. That what does it mean you should love Hashem? It's understanding that if a person is trying to force somebody to go serve idols, to go do avodah zarah, or give up his life, the pasuk is saying to him, "V'haftas Hashem elokecha." You're obligated to love Hashem. In other words, to not go and give in and do the avodah zarah. Rather, you have to love Hashem and be willing to give up your life instead of going and serving the avodah zarah. Okay, so that's the source when it comes to avodah zarah. What's the source of the other two? That how do I know when it comes to illicit relations and killing that a person is obligated to give up his life and not go and do the Aveira to save his life? The Tanya Rebbe Omer ki ka'asher yakum ish al reyehu etzacho nefesh kein hadavar hazeh. Okay, so the pasuk in the Chumash is talking about if a person raped a woman, and the pasuk says that the woman is innocent. Ein l'nara chet mavis, she's innocent, she didn't do anything wrong. And the pasuk adds ki kasher yakum ish al reyehu, just like when a person gets up and kills his friend, not such a good friend, he kills another Jew or tzacha nefesh, and he kills another person. Kein hadavar hazeh. So too, this case of when a person was ma'anes, a person raped a lady, it's just like a person who killed his friend. So the pasuk's connecting, it's comparing a person who kills his friend is similar to a person who rapes a lady. So what's the comparison? So says Rebbe, for what thing is the pasuk coming to compare killing to the case of Nar Marasa, a lady who was raped? Ma nara murasa nitin latila benafsho, just like in a case where if a person's running after this married girl, this girl who's 12 and married, and she only is at the stage of kiddushin with her husband. In other words, she's never lived with her husband. He was makadesh her, he married her, and now a person is running after her in order to have relations with her. Okay? She's running away, a person's running after her. So ma narasa, just like by a nara muhurasa. By that case where a person's running after this young married girl to have relations with a married lady, nitin latzila benafsho, the halacha is, there's a halacha called rodef, which means in certain situations, if a person's running to do an aveira, then a person has a mitzvah to stop them. So one example is if you see a person running after somebody to kill somebody, so you have a mitzvah to stop the person from killing this innocent person. So another example is if you see a person chasing after a married lady to try to rape her, so there's a halacha that a person has to stop him. So where do we learn that from? Rashi brings, it's from the Gemara in Sanhedrin, that the pasuk says, Ein Moshia lo, that there was nobody who could have saved her. Right? Chazal learned from there, Hayesh la Moshia, sounds like if there was somebody who could have saved her, save her in any way possible. Okay, so that's where we learn the halacha of rodef, which is if a person's chasing after this married lady to try to have relations with her, so there's a mitzvah called rodef to stop the person who's trying to attack her. So ma narasa, from that case of this married lady, I learned the halacha, nitin latzila benafsho, that a person should kill the person trying to attack her, af rotseyach, the Gemara is saying, etc. Nitin latila benafsho. So too I learn, the pasuk connected a murderer to the case of rape to tell me just like by the case of rape, we learned in the pasuk that a person has a mitzvah to stop the person trying to do it to her. So too, when it comes to killing, if you see a person chasing after somebody to kill him, you also have a mitzvah to stop the person from killing him. Okay, just to clarify. In this halach of rodef, it means before it happens. In other words, a person, sees one person chasing after another person to kill him. It means there's a mitzvah to stop it before it happens. If a person didn't get there in time and it already happened, so then it's usur. You're not allowed to do anything to the murderer. Right? We have a court system, which we don't do nowadays, but we have a court system that judges people and has death penalties. But this halacha is before a crime was committed. The Torah wants you to save the person from being the victim. Once the person was already the victim, then it's prohibited for a person to act upon the person who did it. Okay, so that's one connection we see between the case of murder and a case of person who's going to rape the married girl. Okay, back to what we were looking for. Ma rotzeach yaharig val yavor. Right, we said there's 3 examples where a person has to give up his life and not do the aveira, do the sin to save his life. So ma rotzeach yaharig val yavor. Another reason the Torah connected the case of a person raping the girl to a person who's killing the person, because by killing, the halacha is yaharig val yavor, that a person is not allowed to kill to save his life. He's obligated to not kill the person and give up his life, so we'll have to see what the source of that is. But the Gemara is saying, just like by killing, we know that's the halacha. So af nar miras, another reason the Torah connected the case of rape to the case of killing is to say, just like by killing, the law is yaharig val yavor, don't kill, rather get killed. So af nar miras yaharig val yavor. So too when it comes to a case of rape, that if a person says, go have relations with this girl or I'll kill you, the person's obligated to not have the relations and be willing to get killed. Just to clarify, if a person should never be in this situation, but if a person's in a situation and they say, go have relations with this person or I'll kill you, the best option is kill the person who's putting the gun to the head. Right? That's for sure allowed, because he's a rodef to kill you. Right? We're saying, assuming that's not an option, so the 2 options are get killed or go do the action. So then the Gemara is saying that by killing and by rape, a person is obligated to give up his life. For Ratziach Gufei Minolan, what's your source by killing that if a person says, go kill that person or I'll kill you, that a person has to give up his life. Minol and svarhi. Where is this a svar? The Huda Asalakame de Rava, Rabba, Omrle. Person came in front of Rabba and said, Omrli Mari Duroy. Some official in my town said, Katle Laplanya Vilokatona, go kill that person, if not, I'll kill you. Omrle, Rabba said, Naktalach Velotikto. You have to get killed, you're not allowed to kill the person. My chazis tadamididach sumak tfei. What's the logic? Because who says your life is more valuable? Dilmadamadu gavra sumak tfei. Maybe your friend's life is more valuable. Right, so it's a fascinating thing. It means even if that person's 150 and I'm 18, and even if that person's not such a good guy and I'm a good guy, you have no right to make cheshbonos. You have no right to make such calculations. Right? Every person's in the world for a purpose. So you have no right to decide that my life is more valuable than somebody else. And that's why the halacha is you have to give up your life. So since that's the source, that's the logic which tells me now, so too when it comes to illicit relations, a person has to give up his life. Okay, so the source by serving idols, a person has to give up his life, is ve'ahavtas Hashem elakacha. A person should love Hashem even b'chol nafshecha, with his whole life. The source by killing is a logic, a svara, which says you have no right to decide your life is more valuable than his, and therefore you have to sit there and you could try to kill the person who's attacking you, but you're not allowed to make a decision to go kill somebody else. And the source by illicit relations is the pasuk connected killing to a case of illicit relations. Okay, so Tosas here, we're not going to read the whole thing inside, but Tosas here is a fascinating discussion. Tosas talks about this different places. That let's say, right, the case we're talking is a person comes and puts a gun to the person's head, says, go kill that person or I'll kill you. Okay, so we learned that the halakha is you're not allowed to go kill the person, you have to be willing to get killed. Tosas says, let's say you had a case the other way. Let's say a person puts a gun to somebody's head and said, let me throw you onto that person. I'm going to use you as the bullet to throw you onto that little child or a baby. I'm going to use you as the bullet to throw you onto that person to kill him. And if you don't cooperate to be my bullet, so then I'm going to kill you. In other words, he's not saying, go kill that person. He's saying, cooperate to let me use you to throw you on that person to kill him. And if not, then I'll kill you. Anybody have any thoughts? You hear the difference? In other words, the Gemara's case was the person says, go pull the trigger on that person. So the Gemara said, you're not allowed to pull the trigger. Tosas says, let's say you had a case where the person didn't say, go pull the trigger. The person said, let me use you as the bullet. And if you don't cooperate to let me use you as the bullet, so then I'm going to kill you. So is a person obligated in that situation to cooperate? So Tosas says he's not obligated. In other words, he's not obligated to give up his life. He's allowed to go along with it. So why? Tosas says the whole reason for the Gemara is that you have no right to make a decision to go kill somebody for the sake of your life. Tosas says in this case, I'm not making a decision. I'm Shev al Taisei. I'm just sitting here. The person's coming and picking the person up and using him as a bullet. So that's not called I'm deciding my life is more valuable than his. Tosas says that's called I'm letting him decide whose life is more valuable whose life is more valuable. So Tosas says since the whole source of the halacha is a svara, a logic, so then if you have a case where the person is not obligating me to do anything active, he's just suggesting I should do something passively, so then Tosas says the logic really goes the other way, and it would be allowed for a person to go along with it and be the bullet of the person, and he's not obligated to give up his life. Okay, I thought that was interesting. Okay, you have a lady who was pregnant, and she had what the Mishnah was describing, that the child started smelling something. So they came in front of Rebbe and said, can we give her food? So he said, Zilu lechushula, first whisper to her the Yoma de Kippurihu, whisper to her it's Yom Kippur, see if that can calm down this drive. Lechushula il chishala. v'lchisha. So they whispered to her, and it calmed down that drive. Kari alei b'terem atzrich bebeten yedatich. So Rebbe said about her, while the child was still in the womb, I already knew it. In other words, I could tell that it was a good person. Nafak mina Rebbe Yochanan. And who came out of it? Rebbe Yochanan, who we know was a good person. Hahi ober de archa. There was another child that also lakame de Rebbe Chanina, that came in front of Rebbe Chanina. The same thing happened, that there was this drive that the child smelled something, and the lady came and said she had a desire to eat something on Yom Kippur. So he gave her the same advice, to whisper to her it's Yom Kippur, and it didn't work. So he said about this lady that a bad thing was going to come out of it. And the person who came out was a person who was Otzer Piri, which Rashi explains that he would basically take the fruits off the market until there was not that much supply, and then he would pull it out and start charging very, very high prices. Okay, so interesting thing. Okay, we'll stop over here. Okay, thank you.